Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Golov, Marketing Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I wanted to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers, so please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. Next slide, please. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. Next slide, please. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. Next slide, please. We serve a very broad client base. Next slide, please. Spanning all industries. Today, we are thrilled to introduce Scott Carothers, Senior Globalization Executive at the Kinetic the Technology Agency. Scott is a 30-year veteran of corporate marketing with a specific focus on technical solutions, innovations, and software. His start was on a Genesis team introducing one of the first DOS PC-based graphic software, successfully placing the product into 300 Fortune 500 companies. He has since evolved into cutting-edge translation technology and digital asset management solutions. Scott is based in Louisville, Kentucky. Without further ado, welcome, Scott.
Great, Adam, thank you very much, and I appreciate this opportunity to speak to your base of listeners and audience. Today we're going to speak about firefighting the translation process and using metrics to help resolve some of the issues. So what we're going to go over today is we're going to actually talk about the issues of typical translations and the processes that are involved. We're going to look at some of the metrics that current buyers are using. We will definitely be going over metrics that are most valued for process improvement, and then we'll be showing some optimized metrics from some of our client base on how they use it to see where the improvements are, where the report cards are, where the tracking is. And then for all those that have bosses and people upstairs, we'll show some of the cost tracking metrics on where there's actual savings involved. At the end, Adam will help with the questions and answers, but we'll take questions and answers and again fill the chat box as they come to mind during the presentation, and look forward to catching up with you at the end of this, going over it. So again, let's begin. So initially looking at a product launch or in a product life cycle, where do the translations actually come in? For many, they always know where the content is, but are the translations also factored in as content? And when going to global markets, it's crucial that the translations are done. But here's some just general thought questions. As you do prepare the content, how are you preparing the translations? And with this, have translations ever held up a product launch? And again, these are thought questions. Or have translations ever cost rush fees that you were late or you were too short a time that you're now being charged rush fees? Is there an actual process in place? Do you have a process in place for the taskmaster and the folks that are assigning the translations, the actual translators and LSPs, language service providers? And then the in-country reviewers. Is there a process for these three different areas that are involved with the translations? And then with that, with the reviewers as well, are they part of the scheduling? So here are normal headaches that occur with the translation process. Everyone is most concerned about quality. Are the translations too literal? Something as simple as toss me the ball might be translated to another language on pick up object, cock arm, and push projectile forward. It's a correct translation, but it doesn't have the nuance. It doesn't have the feel of what you're trying to say. So quality is always the top issue. Then delivery of the actual content being translated. Different languages take different amounts of time to get accomplished, and have you factored that in when you're working on the translations, on which translation should go first or second? Budgeting. Budgeting is quite often a last-minute thing. If you're working feverishly to get the content done for a product rollout and translations are kind of a second thought, are not factored in as well. That also means the budget and the dollars are announced right there, right then when the projects are introduced. And then the in-country reviewers, again, the scheduling. Are they part of your schedule, or are they volunteers working on their own schedule? So these are what we see as typical headaches in the current processes that go on for getting translations. But for the enterprise, for the company, it's an entirely different set of problems. Global companies have multiple divisions and multiple business units. They have multiple locations, and translations quite often are decentralized. Each business unit is doing their own thing and not communicating with anybody else. Translation memory. This is the actual intellectual property. This is your content translated, and with this quite often there is no centralized translation memory or no workflows that feed into it that is consistent with the whole enterprise. It's with each of the different translation groups. And inconsistent pricing. We continue to find that one LSP may be at something like 23 cents per word for Spanish, and another LSP is at 19 cents per word for Spanish. We've also seen inconsistent pricing within business units from the same LSP. Case in point, we had one group that one business unit was doing $1.5 million in translations, and the LSP had a particular word cost for that group, versus another group that was only doing about $50,000 a year and a different pricing from the same LSP for the same language pairs. So this is still seen as a seller's market. It's a black hole. In many cases, information that you get from the language service providers are not much more than just what is the word count, what were the translation memory matches and partial matches, and what's the price for the project. It may not be much more information than that. In many cases, there's no real clarity on what the costs are, what the timing is. To some degree, there's no real accountability by the LSP. It's not their responsibility to be doing report cards on your processes. And in many cases, the LSPs only know the information on the projects they've done. They do not know any of their competitors' projects or costs or things like that. So it isn't a clear picture. And then in most cases, companies feel that the LSPs that they have know the nuances of their products, and they feel uncomfortable to switch to other particular vendors that might be competent just because they've been working with them for so long. They have a feel for what the product is, and they're hesitant to move on. So there's no real report cards on the process improvement. How do you know something is being optimized, or how do you know the process is getting better if you don't have metrics? It's very complex. This is a very heavy graphic, but it's just to show content goes from you to the translator, you get a quote, it comes back, then the project is submitted with all the additional files that need to go with it, it gets translated, it comes back for review, it gets edits, it goes back into the translators, it goes to the in-country reviewers. There's just a tremendous amount of back and forth, and nobody is logging or keeping information of all these steps as they occur. And where are the translations? Translations can be in many places within the enterprise. And again, most of these people are not talking to each other. And translations are quite often a sporadic task. It is very well understood that technical publications and marketing are quite often where the heaviest content is, legal, regulatory, and compliance as well. But there's other areas, HR, website, e-commerce, quality assurance, product development, within IT. There are many different areas within the enterprise that will be doing translations, and again on a sporadic basis. And when it's all factored out, this very complex process of going back and forth in the communications, there's just not a whole lot of information that is being quantified or set up in a form of metrics. And in most cases, enterprise don't have translations as a line item. Quite often they're part of a print project or R&D or the tech pubs group. So procurement, in many cases, may not even know translations are occurring or occurring at any particular dollar volume in a total picture of the enterprise. So this implies risks. For management, if this is going on, it's this complex, and the information is being presented to the translators at the last minute, there's not a whole lot of budget accountability or even understanding of what the dollars are going to be other than looking at how much you spent within your area last year and trying to stay within that range. There's very few LSPs, often just one or two. Many times they're even referred to as trusted vendors, or I have a brother at Microsoft that uses within the Xbox division that was using just one LSP, and I asked him about it and he said it's a trusted vendor. Asking him what's a trusted vendor, he said that in essence that's a vendor that we really don't know what they do and we just simply pay the bill. So in many cases, if there's just one or two, you may be tied to that translator's technology. How do you know how they're optimizing your efforts for doing the translations? And in many cases, they are holding on to the translation memory. That's a common factor. But when they control the translation memory, and if there are other LSPs, again, they don't know what other LSPs are doing, and in some cases you may not know, nor may they know, when content has been translated multiple times when you're going to different TMs. So there's no real translation validation ratings on performance, quality, or turnaround time. But there is a way to focus in and change this just by simply using metrics. First and foremost, centralizing your translation memory. You maintaining the translation memory or collecting the translation memories from the different LSPs into one place, one centralized area. With that, when you have control and you're keeping metrics, you can start using that to get vendor independence or to actually be able to choose the best translator for the language pair. And by isolating the translation memory and by keeping metrics, you play the part of the enterprise and you play the part of a procurement group where you start keeping metrics on everything, and when you do, the process improves and you have a constant report card on where the improvements are occurring. You can start putting out the firefighting issues by keeping the metrics on the translations. So what are some of the most common metrics that localization managers or tech writers or the people who make the assignments keep? For the most part, from what we've seen, they usually know which LSP has the assignment, they know what the deadline is, and then they usually know what the timing is for the post-editing or why was it late. And to some extent, that's about as far as it goes on the metrics from the buyer's perspective. It also involves emails and setting up folders, spreadsheets. There's a lot of manual entries. And for the look managers and the tech writers, they may be the only ones doing this. They may not have the LSPs helping with this, and in most cases they don't have the SMEs or in-country reviewers helping with this, which is a great resource that we'll talk about here shortly. And with the translation memory, when the translation memory is in the control of the LSPs, in many cases, again, you don't know when content has been translated multiple times, and the LSPs are project management groups for the most part, and they are contracting to translators that are independent translators, and there the TM may be on their environment, and you never know if your content is going into a language bucket that it may be utilized for other clients that they have to maximize the matches and such to help reduce their costs on the translations at their end, yet the markup is still there for you. So there's issues on how secure is the translation memory. For the actual language service providers, in most cases they are providing what the new words are, what the 100% matches are, what the partial match rates are, and then in most cases what the word content reuse is. You should not be paying a second time for a word that is placed in a document multiple times prior to going to the translation memory analysis. You usually see price, but there may be other costs out there such as project management fees, review time, desktop publishing based on what the content is. It isn't always there, but these are things that they do provide on a project. And again, they only know the projects they're doing. They don't know the projects other LSPs are doing. For the in-country reviewers, this is an interesting place where you may have a new ally that you didn't realize you had. The in-country reviewers will review the content, perhaps make the final edits or mark the final edits for the translators to update. But in here, are you using them for the timing or the word error count or the aesthetics or the style sheets or the glossaries? They may come into play and be an absolute great source of metrics that are easy to do, quick to do at the end of each project. And again, we'll talk more about this as we get into it. So, most valuable metrics. We see that the most valuable metrics are aggregate volume, the actual turnaround time, the translation memory analysis, the language service provider ratings on quality, cost competitiveness, and delivery time, and then the cost tracking. Where are you saving the dollars in the total picture at the enterprise level? Aggregate volume. You want to know what the word counts are per language pair. You want to know how many projects have occurred and where they've occurred. And you also want to know the number of LSPs. In many cases, you're working with one in your unit, but how about the other business units? With the aggregate volume, especially on the word count, if you have the translation memory in your possession and you can see all of the content going in and out with all the LSPs, you start recognizing we did 1 million words in Chinese Mandarin last year. This year we did 2 million. I think we're at a position where we should be able to negotiate. This is going to start changing it from a seller's market to a buyer's market. Then the number of projects. This shows a big picture on as you start learning about other business units and which projects come in, you start realizing what the language pairs that are most often used, where the matches are in the translation memory. All this plays against the aggregate volume. And with this, you start seeing where you have source and target languages that are common between the different business units. You may have backup power with the LSPs. And by that I mean our largest client with 24 business units initially thought they had 2 LSPs. But when they approached all the business units started letting them know, well, we don't use those LSPs, we have our favorite one. And by the time they did the survey and started making translations a line item and keeping the metrics, they found out they had 15 LSPs. The initial reaction was like, well, that's too many, but it really turned out to be an incredible benefit because they were averaging at least 5 LSPs for each language pair. And with this, they now had backup that knew the nuances, were within the accounting, so these are vendors that are already being paid, but they have ammunition to meet the deadlines that started dissolving the rush charges. And they did this by establishing the metrics and which business units are doing the same languages. Second, the turnaround time. There is a process for doing translations. There are steps in this process. The first step is internationalization. That's the actual preparation of documents to go into the translation memory for word count analysis. This is an area that does cost time. If you're using HTML, XML, or DITA formats, this goes through internationalization with no issues. The attributes and nuances of the file formats are gone. But if you're doing FrameMaker, InDesign, Microsoft Office solutions, or PDFs, in some cases you may have to break down these files before they go to the translation memory to maximize the word matches. That costs time, PDFs being the focal point on what takes the most time to break down and organize for TM analysis. Translations. The translations themselves, the time and the factor of what goes involved. 10 pages of English may turn into 12 pages of French, and have you factored that in? And have you factored that in for the output as well, for things like impositions for printing on suddenly you have dead pages that you have to account for, or cell cavity count on websites and things like that for languages that expand more and you don't have enough cells. So these are things that you have to factor in. In-country reviewers. This is another area where they're volunteers and they may not be on your schedule, and you need to factor that in. The actual time it takes for edits. Desktop publishing, is that established as a per page or an hourly rate, and then the final deadline. So these turnaround times come into play in each step of the process, and you can keep metrics on each part of this. There's another part of the turnaround time. Where are the hang-ups? Where are the stall points? You have 10 in-house clients and you discover that 2 out of the 10 are always late, are unorganized, and they're causing the delays in the process. Metrics can help with this. Or you are continually assigning content to be translated to, let's say, Russian, and your expectations are always in a set amount of days and it's always several days later. Is it a realistic turnaround time? The metrics will help you realize maybe these languages take longer than you think and you can start scheduling accordingly. And then metrics on just things like the vendors themselves, the LSPs themselves, on perhaps these LSPs are late on particular languages to also help you pinpoint, is it the LSP, is it the client, is it the language? The metrics on the turnaround time starts helping with realistic time frames for projects in the future. Third, the translation memory analysis. The content reuse. You want to see where the words have been reused multiple times. You want to see new word counts. You want to see the matches, the partial matches. But from this too, over time, you want to start seeing the trends. As a translation memory grows in a particular target language, what are the trends on the time and what are the overall matches? This starts equating to dollars and predictability for the future on as you go into new countries and new languages. This helps the enterprise see all of this. This also quantifies perhaps the TMS system you purchase or the content management system you purchase on these blueprints, holding on to the metrics on the trends, on where the cost savings are and what the times are to get products to the marketplace. It's all about saving the money and reusability for the future, having the metrics available to see this. Fourth, the language service performance ratings. This is based on quality, the number of defects per 1,000 words, but it can also be more than that. It could be the misspellings of the translated content. It could be the style sheets, the glossaries, were they used? Were the headers and footers correctly placed? Average delivery time. What time does it take for the LSPs to get the content to the marketplace based on the language pair? And then the cost competitiveness. If you've got metrics on your language service providers, you may discover that this LSP is at 29 cents for a particular language, yet compared to all the other LSPs, he is under the overall average of maybe 32 cents. So you can see the cost competitiveness of the LSP on what their past performance is and to the other LSPs that you are using by having the metrics at hand. When you have the metrics and you can rate the LSPs on quality, cost competitiveness, and turnaround time, you can also start seeing which LSP performs better on a particular language pair. In some cases, you may be using LSPs in Europe that are great with European languages but not as solid for Asian languages, where you may have translators that are in Asia and vice versa. They're very good with Asian languages but not as strong with European languages. These metrics help you factor in who's the best for the particular language pair. And it puts you back into a buyer's market as well for negotiating. You've seen that we're doing more languages, or we're doing more words on an aggregate volume. We're seeing that we're using you for these language pairs because you're much better, but the numbers have gone up. It may be time to negotiate again. Cost savings. What goes around for the time savings in the process is also reflective in the cost savings for that same process. If you can transition away from PDFs and streamline more into file formats like HTML, XML, and DITA, the internationalization costs start going down. And many times those internationalization costs are reflected in the project management fees, so that too means the costs can go down. If your translation memory is growing and it's been centralized and you're controlling all that, you're actually translating less because you're having more matches, so that is lower cost, the review is lower cost, desktop publishing is going down as well. So the cumulative cost is going down by centralizing the TM and keeping the metrics on all of this. There's one area that's new to the market in the past couple of years, and that's bid savings. In some cases, people are starting to bid out the translations with the existing group of LSPs that they have. When you have the metrics on all of this, you've got ammunition to work with the LSPs, especially if you have 4 or 5 or 6 LSPs and they are doing the same language pairs. And to kind of put this in perspective, according to Common Sense Advisory, the translation marketplace is about $37 billion, growing in between 6 to 12% per year. There's 28,000 plus language service providers. These are project management groups. And there's over 250,000 certified translators, and we even heard a number from Jaap Vandermeer of Taos saying that he thought it was over 500,000. Bid it out. This is a commodity market. This is an opportunity to get more savings and extend the buyer's market. And to bring this point even further, I believe most would agree that the printing industry is a commodity business. Most enterprises have several printers or certainly bid out several printers. And yet that's a $72 billion industry, and there are less printers than there are LSPs. So it's almost twice the size of a market with fewer printers. You would definitely put that out to bid. You may want to start considering putting it out to bid with LSPs. So we're going to take a look at some of the metrics that some of our clients have used to optimize their process and get a report card on where they are. First and foremost, for yourself, you definitely do have to define your process, the process between the staff, the language service providers, and the in-country reviewers, and with your in-house clients as well. But you need to establish what your process is and where the metrics are needed to maximize or optimize the process. This is an example of one of our clients, and in this circle, and again, this is a heavy graphic, but with this, the focus on this is in the center is the translation memory. Client established the translation memory as their intellectual property. They centralized it, and at this point, they start the process by taking the content, having it internationalized, and pre-translation analysis before it goes to a vendor so they can see the costs in advance and budget accordingly. They have built into their environment each of the LSP's pricing, so they know in advance what the costs are for the desktop publishing at the hourly rate or at the per page rate, whatever it is, the review cost, and then the actual translation cost on a per word basis. And with this, they can quickly see what that cost is, how that cost compares to all vendors, where their rating is, and they now can budget in advance. So as they're working on content, they can see in advance what the costs are going to be before it even goes to the LSP. If there's a tremendous amount of content, and if there's a circumstance that the deadlines are tight, they take it one step further and they will bid it out. And with that, they have a dashboard that they've built. In the dashboard, they can see the metrics on total words and how many new words. They can see the LSPs that they have that are good for that target language. They can see what their ratings are. And they can quickly assess on a bid circumstance what the pricing is, the contracted pricing of their per word, desktop publishing and review, and now a bid price. So they can see for this particular LSP, they're being very aggressive. In addition to that, they also break out the different pieces of the translation where they may keep the in-house review with their in-country reviewers or SME. They may keep the desktop publishing with the Tech Pubs group, and the translations are the only thing that are done by the LSP. So they're actually chopping up the translation into pieces on, I want to see the whole price of translation, review, and desktop publishing, and then I want to see various aspects of it. And on this, with this one particular vendor that quoted lower price, They opted not to break it apart, so they probably negotiated, we'll do the whole thing at this price if we get the whole thing. But these are new options with this dashboard that they're using to keep it into a buyer's market because they have the metrics on each of the different LSPs. It gets translated. It does go to review to the SMEs or the in-country reviewers, and this is a great place to take a stop for the in-country reviewers and make them part of the process. In this process, when a project's done, there's a short list of questions here. I'll go over them real briefly with you here. How many words were not translated correctly? How many words were not translated? How many words were incorrectly spelled or mistyped? How many symbols were not displayed correctly? How many sections had poor legibility? How many sections had format errors? Would you hire this translator based on the translation work reviewed? How many documents were named incorrectly? How many documents were applied to the correct, how many documents were not applied to the correct folders? So it's just a real quick drop down, a yes or no or a number rating, and with this, from that point, it can go into a spreadsheet, and now you have ratings on the LSPs in regards to the quality factor on the content that was translated. You can keep this so you can compare it to the same LSP as time goes on, or you can use this to compare to other LSPs that do the same language pairs. But the in-country reviewers can be a huge asset. It's a very quick questionnaire. It's a pop-up. It's the same questionnaire every time. They don't have to think about it. And if set up to a routine, it can be something that they do or understand that they have to do at the end of each project. It only takes a few moments. Project is completed. And at this point, this is also a great place to make an assessment on the timing, the deliverables. Were they on time? Was this back to 2 of the 10 in-house clients that you have that were unorganized and they are always late? Was this back to perhaps a particular language, that particular language is always delayed because you have not correctly factored in the time it takes for that particular language going from the source to the target? Or perhaps it might have been the language service provider. In this case, you've tagged this here on what the project was, what the language was, who the vendor was, and that the expected turnaround time was 3 days, but it took them 6 days. So these are now metrics on the timing factor that you can keep and compare it to the same LSP or to other LSPs. It's all just having the metrics at hand. Project is done, and we are saying the project, but now let's look at the aggregate level of all this information. When a project is done, translation memory will be uploaded. Translation memory is now growing, and you can start seeing aggregate volume as opposed to project volume of that language pair or that product or that business division or the LSP, what have you. In this case, here's a spreadsheet that shows each of the target language, what the words were submitted, what the match rate is, what the savings was by having the translation memory, what it would have cost without it, how that was calculated, the review cost, the desktop publishing, the cost on that as aggregate volumes per language pair. Here it is in just a graph form. Here you can see as far as match rate analysis with the Russian is averaging about 47% match rate. This may be 2 or 3 years into doing Russian, whereas at the other end, the Chinese or the Italian at 2 or 4%. We may be in the first weeks, the first couple of months of the TM just starting to be built. But this gives you an idea of the trends. So you could see first year we may be up to 12 or 14%, but by the third year we're starting to see averages that are in excess of 40%. That's reflective on time to market and more profitability on the product when you can say in 3 years we know there will be less time to do translations, we can get to market quicker, and it will cost less. We've got a trend. We can see the match rates. With this, you can also see this the same way dollar-wise. Here are total dollars on words that were not done again or second time by a human being, but that we had through the translation memory. So we're now seeing true reflective dollar cost on words that were not translated and what we saved in the course of years, and that grows. It can be substantial when you have the metrics at hand at an aggregate level. For one of our clients, they've got a real quick dashboard. It's a real time where they have it accessible so they can see in a snapshot, very quick snapshot, what the trend is for the overall match rate, what the aggregate volume is for each language pair, what the matches are, what those percentages are, and then the trend rates. What's the overall match rate? What's the bid savings rate? By putting out to bid, this particular client was getting 26% additional savings just by putting it out to bid. The TM savings rate, and then the word per word savings rate or per word average cost going down. Again, it's a very quick dashboard and it's just a snapshot, but it's something that they have for management. Going to the cost tracking, the savings, from what we've seen with the customer base that we have and what we're seeing in the marketplace for those that centralize their translation memory, first year savings is 24 to 33%. Second year is 40%, and in the third year we've seen 50% in excess up to about 78% savings in dollars just by centralizing the translation memory. So I want to kind of recap here, and that is the issues we had talked about, or what are the issues or the headaches and the problems of the process. What are some of the basic metrics that are currently being used, but what are the most valuable metrics for process improvement and getting a report card on where you've optimized your translation process. And then the examples of what some of our clients have used on the translation process here, and then the cost tracking and the metrics, measuring the savings. I will say too that in these cases, a lot of this is just a matter of habits, new habits, defining the process and defining what metrics you want to have, setting up spreadsheets, and in cases there are ways of automating the process as well. But with this, it's a new habit, it's getting all the players involved, and with these metrics there's just substantial savings and substantial areas for process improvement. At this point I want to say thank you very much for spending the time with me today, and Adam with DCL Labs on letting us have this platform to present to you. Adam, I'll step back here and welcome any questions that might have occurred, or please step back in if you would.
Thank you, Scott. A very informative webinar indeed. The first question that has come in is, what if the in-country reviewers don't participate on your schedule the way you want?
This is a great question, and this is a question that we see on a very regular basis. The in-country reviewers in many cases are volunteers. They are not assigned to do this, but they do this as a favor. And we're actually seeing a shift or a trend change where companies are starting to assign translators to translate the content and a second translator to review the content. This is not always the best method to take, but it does get one to review another and capture the nuances quickly. But the logic behind this is there will be times where an in-country reviewer may not be quick enough that it is holding up a product, and it would cost more to hold the product up and wait for the in-country reviewer than to pay additional dollars for a second translator to do the review. And as you build this up, you can also start going back and forth. The first translator could be the reviewer the second time. So they both are catching each other on the nuances of the content being done. But thank you, I appreciate that.
Thank you, Scott. The next question that's come in is, how do you get the staff? How do you get the staff, language service providers, and reviewers to keep the metrics?
This is going to go back to building your process and establishing where you want the metrics to occur. There's another place where you can get help and where this can all come into play, and that is the procurement department will be ecstatic to find some place in the company to get double-digit savings. And I think you'll find if you involve procurement, and we have yet to see a localization manager or a tech writer get a bonus for saving money, but a procurement officer does. The tech writers and the loc managers, they want the quality and the turnaround time, but the procurement department, when they see these kind of savings, by utilizing the metrics, it can come in very quickly with their assistant to organize it, and from doing so, the whole enterprise benefits by quality and turnaround time. So what we've seen with getting the three players to work, it's a habit. It's having spreadsheets or information available for them to quickly make their assessments, but I think you'd be surprised with procurement, that may be your best ally. That also means as dollars are saved, that may be content management systems or translation management systems that you can acquire in your area from having that success. We have definitely seen that happen too.
Great. Thank you, Scott. The last question has come in is, are there tools that can keep the metrics?
Great question, or I guess I have to put out in the open. Our tool, the Globalizer, absolutely does this as an automated feature. There are other softwares out there when you think of Oracle or SAP, Accenture, IBM, Tableau. There are some other products out there that can help you with the metrics and automate the metrics. In our particular case, our tool does this automatically as you're working with the workflow and the centralized TM. But there are products out there that will help streamline the process. Again, it's just you need to have organized in your mind what metrics you want. In our case, this is just an automatic feature of the tool, and it does hundreds and hundreds of metrics.
Thank you, Scott. Another question that just came in is, are most LSPs reluctant to release the translation memory?
It's understood to be the client's intellectual property. That is theirs, and the LSPs should be obliged to offer that content to them. It should also be segregated for that particular client. I would have some issues if an LSP was reluctant to hand back the translation memory. LSPs are usually very good about this. Sometimes it's the contracted translators where the content has been put into a language bucket. So your source and target language, let's say English to Italian, suddenly it's in an Italian bucket with 4 other clients. Then it gets very difficult to segregate back out your content. So most LSPs are segregating the content. It is your intellectual property. There shouldn't be any hesitancy for them to give that back to you, and it should be typically in a TMX file format, an XLIF format, or a TTX, but in most cases it's a TMX file format, and that should be readily passed back.
Great. Thank you, Scott. That's all the questions that we've received so far, and thank you everyone for attending. This will conclude today's broadcast. You will be able to access the recorded version of today's webinar in the webinar archive section of our website located at www.dclab.com. Our next webinar will be next week, Tuesday, November 10th at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, titled Converting and Integrating Legacy Data and Documents When Implementing a New CMS, presented by Greg Fagan, Sales Director, DCL. Thank you everyone for attending, and have a great day.
Thank you, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott.